good morning. I do not imagine it's possible to outdo Hungary in the presentation of anti-corruption failures, so I won't do that. Instead, I will talk to you about refrigerator magnets. Can I ask you, how many of you have a refrigerator magnet on your fridge at home? Could you raise your hand? A fridge magnet. So a lot of people have refrigerator magnets in their homes. And so I asked myself this question, well, where do refrigerator magnets come from? And it's a strange question to ask if you are a civil activist, but there's a reason behind it. And so I Googled it, and apparently it's a recent phenomenon. I don't know if you know, I didn't, but the first refrigerator magnets appeared in early 1970s. Also, the powerful Google says, and it was Mr. William Zimmerman who patented fridge magnets, living in St. Louis, Missouri. Before that, such thing apparently did not exist. And now, as we just saw, almost every single person has a fridge magnet in their room. Now, why am I asking this question? Well, obviously, fridge magnets is one of the most wasteful things you can possibly think of. I mean, if you pause and you think just for a second, what's use in a fridge magnet? It looks pretty. Sometimes it's a nice remembrance of things that you saw, but it generally serves very little purpose. So to me, it's a quintessential example of how something which is not really useful can end up in our home. And surely what we do then has a much better chance of reaching each and every individual if we get it right? And I guess that's the challenge that we're all facing now, because a lot of times we realize that we might be doing this great, magnificent work, and very few people know about it. Very few people are able to relate, and it certainly is not in every people's home. Because I understand that the challenge that we all have is also to make sure that what we do becomes a way of life and a part of a daily life of every single individual that we are dealing with in our country. And so I come from a country which I think has the right setting for that. I come from Lithuania, and you could generally qualify me as a lab rat. Not because I'm a lab rat, but because Lithuania provides a perfect lab setting for you to experiment with things, anything civil, anything anti-corruption, you name it, simply because we are a country of 3 million people. So is Latvia and Estonia. They're actually much smaller. Latvia is about 2 million, and Estonia is 1.5 and declining. And since Jakob was very kind to let me talk about the Baltics, this is what I'll do. But I will focus on Lithuania by and large. So obviously, if you're a large NGO, or at least a medium-sized NGO of, say, 8-9 people, and my colleague journalists tell me that an average size of a think tank in the world is 4 or 5 people, well, then you have a decent shot at making history, and you can actually try things out, you can experiment, you can run your sociological surveys, you can reach out households, and you can really see what works and what doesn't. And Lithuania, and the entire Baltics for that matter, is a good place to do that. We have a relatively high penetration rate. Usually 60–70% of households in Baltic countries have connection to the internet. We're quite amazing with mobile phones. Each person has 1.5 mobile phone in his or her pocket. So that's also an advantage, something that you can work with. And if you look at other statistics, we are at least an average when it comes to the European Union, to say the least. If you look at our anti-corruption story, well, sure, we do have some petty corruption. Lithuania still leads the way in that. According to the Global Corruption Barometer that was conducted last year, we still led the European Union in terms of the bribes paid to public sector officials to get a service done. About a quarter of Lithuanians, 26%, said they gave a bribe over the past 12 years. The numbers for Latvians and Estonians are a little bit smaller. It's 19% Latvians and 6% Estonians. And you could generally see it as a post-Soviet remain. right? A public sector failure to really address the issue. Usually those bribes would be paid in the healthcare sector, the traffic police. What you see though is that countries slowly and surely are addressing this issue, especially when it comes to the traffic police. I dare say that finally they have understood that this is something which is a concern and something that you do need to fix. However, we also have another problem when it comes to anti-corruption, and that is political corruption, nepotism. If you look at the same global corruption barometer, you see that people in Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania quite often believe that big businesses, just as in other parts of the world, have a much bigger influence on the government than an average citizen does. That's a concern. When you look at what people say when it comes to nepotism, they tell you that they often use personal connections to get their job done. And those are vast majority numbers. So that's a concern. The question is how do you go about it and whether people actually have any resolve to sort those issues out. And here again, the Baltics, I don't want to spoil it for you, but we are quite an average country or quite an average region. By and large, people would be willing to go out on the street. The numbers range from 30 to 40%. If you're an Estonian, you're more likely to stay at home. If you're a Lithuanian, you're more likely to get out. People think that signing a petition is not such a bad thing. They would be happy to join something which is posted on avaz.org or something that you present them online. They don't even mind joining an organization that deals with anti-corruption. For instance, in Lithuania, the numbers are quite high. Almost more than 1/3 of people would be willing to become members of an anti-corruption NGO, and they would certainly be willing to spread the word. So if you think about it and you keep in mind the numbers I gave you, don't you think it's a good place to have a go at solutions that you can possibly find, pilot, and then sort of bring over to the larger world? And that's the question that we ask ourselves because, quite frankly, we are still searching for answers. We have a government which understands that anti-corruption is important. The Prime Minister finally said so. But even with this particular coalition, the issue of anti-corruption has been on the agenda for a number of years. We have quite a comprehensive anti-corruption strategy in place when it comes to Lithuania. In Lithuania and Latvia, we have special anti-corruption agencies dealing with larger crime, and we also have a lot of monitoring institutions. And people understand that this is something that you do need to solve. It's not like they're not acknowledging the problem. However, what we have in Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, I think, is a very honest realization that we might not know the answer anymore. Because if you think about it, old tricks, by and large, have failed. There's this huge disappointment when it comes to large institutions being involved in sorting out the problem. It's clear that anti-corruption agencies alone cannot solve the problem. It's clear that you will never have enough funding, as say the Hong Kong Anti-Corruption Commission has, to go after all the crooks. Even if you think about the cases that you have, usually there's this police arrest line. Just think about it. And think if you can relate to your own country. You have a couple of big shots being arrested, maybe put in jail, or at least under investigation, but those people who do end up in jail usually are the smaller fish. So it's clear that there's a very big niche for NGOs like ours, activists that can offer solutions that can be embraced by the public. The question is, what works? And this is the experience that we've had over the past couple of years, because we have had our successes and have had our failures. For instance, a few years back, we published an online bribery and bureaucracy reporting portal called skaidrumolinija.lt. It's a transparencyline.lt equivalent in English. And it failed miserably. We launched it as a double-edged campaign. We wanted to make sure that we have legal service, and that legal service is also expressed through online reports. So we have legal service, and that works, but online reports don't. What we found is that people are generally afraid to report instances of corruption online, and they would rather write an email, ask questions, call, meet, test you, bring a couple of documents in, see whether they can trust you. And they're not as willing to put out their story online and see whether they would get any reaction from people that are involved in their reports. What does work, however, and those are our success stories, is stories when you do most of the work, where you mash the information up yourself and you present interesting insights, as we, for instance, did, I dare say, with our media ownership database, which we launched in the beginning of this year, and which already is approaching 1% of the total population of Lithuania having visited this website in the span of 4 months, which is a big number for a very specific audience-oriented media ownership database, which basically allows you to see how different media outlets in the country are connected, who owns what, how the ownership has been changing. And we've been quite happy to cooperate with the Ministry of Culture and the Radio and Television Commission on that. So it can work. We also been quite successful with our Mano Seimas.lt story, which again in an English translation would sound like My Parliament.lt, which we launched about a year ago, and which in the span of a couple of weeks and 1.5 months preceding the parliamentary elections in Lithuania, managed to reach out to 1% of the total Lithuanian voters number, which again we saw as a success story, knowing that we put in just 3,000 euros into the project and no money into the ad campaign. It basically went viral in the span of a couple of weeks before the elections. So we launched a new Manoseimas.lt, which my colleague Karolis will be talking about in one of the breakout sessions just a few days ago, and the opening of the spring session of our parliament. And now it's a much bigger thing. It's something which you can see updated every 5 minutes. It's something which you can create your own voting history with. So basically you can not only see how parliamentarians vote, but you can also see whether they vote the way you would have voted. And you would be able to create your own voting history and basically track the parliamentary records in the span of a couple of years if you decide to do so. So a clear measure to battle public amnesia that we often have on our hands when we deal with this issue as anti-corruption activists. And finally, journalists will be able to use the widget that we produce to put the results into their articles so that the message is actually being brought across to the public. And of course, you know, those are very small things because we're happy we have them, but at the end of the day, we understand that we're still speaking only about 1 or 2% of the population. Obviously, this is not what we're very happy about, because the idea is to make sure that 50, 60, maybe 70% of the population actually use tools that we produce. So sure, we know that every 5th person in Lithuania would know about TI Lithuania, but does it matter? What do you do for people to not only know your brand, but also be able to relate? Do you spend more time on the issue? Do you speak more in the media? Or do you look for alternative solutions? And I actually think that we are in a good position to be asking these questions. I am quite disappointed with the NGO community in the region in general. And I think that if somebody has a shot, it's us, people like us in this room. Because I think that if not others, at least ourselves, we understand that professionalism and a very meticulous going about your work is something which can push our work forward. And I think increasingly we understand that being an NGO is not a self-fulfilling prophecy. This is something which is a very demanding and hard work in making sure that you can relate to the public and the public can relate to you. And I think in Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, and I speak with my colleagues a lot on this, this is precisely the point of time we're in, We understand that the government is generally quite open to our proposals, and we can push for certain agenda, and we can try and get certain things, but that's not what really makes our day. What we're trying to find is the human face of our organizations and our products, our work, understand how it can be translated into simple everyday human language so that people can understand how they can use it in their everyday lives. And to finish off, I'd like to tell you a story and go back to the magnets. If you, about a week ago, actually 2 weeks ago now, I was at an event, and it was a global Lithuanian event. And there was a person sitting in the room, and everybody else was talking, and he had a lot of business cards on his table. It was a stack of business cards. And he was going through them meticulously. And what I saw shocked me, because not that he was putting them in his wallet. No, he looked at the card, and if he liked it, he would put it in his wallet, but most of the cards ended up in the trash can. He would just rip them apart, and they would end up in the trash can. He didn't need them. He met a lot of people. He kept only those cards that he thought would be useful for him in the future. And I thought, well, look, this is actually a real sustainability test. This is what it's all about, because we meet a lot of people. We hear a lot of good words about our work. People are fascinated by the products we produce, but how many of them actually go back and use it? You all use Google Analytics, I'm sure. So if you look at the bounce rates, if you look at the amount of the returning visitors, people who actually use your work every day, what are those numbers? Are you happy with those numbers? What can we do better? And this is where I want to go back to the fridge magnets, because there's a reason why I brought them up, of course. My dad is fascinated with fridge magnets, so that's what it's all about. And it's not because he is fascinated with fridge magnets. He, I think, wants to get as many fridge magnets from places my sister and I and everybody else in the family have visited, so that then he can, share the spoils. But we kind of keep only the nice magnets. We never keep the magnets that are ugly, dysfunctional, that people give us in promotion and just are being forced upon us. And I think there's a rationale behind this, because at the end of the day, anything that we do can look very nice to us. But the question is, does it make sense to the other side, the people whom we would very much like to have involved? And I think maybe that is the silver lining of the work that we do in our country, because this is the question we increasingly ask, and we understand that what stays is what means something to your everyday Joe on the street, and not the Lithuanian person who is highly fascinated with his work and is intellectually challenged every day in and out. So maybe this is where I'd like to stop, and thank you. Thank you.